Did your son ask you to do something for him, to assist him in a matter?
He asked me to help dispose of Janet's body.
Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Janet March. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you're new to the channel, I tell 3 true crime stories every single week. No, there's no R in that last word. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of crazy thing like the rest of us. And also you can follow me over on TikTok. The link to that is in the description in the link tree below. And no, it's in the link tree in the description below if you spoke English well, greatly. Mike, you don't. Or the link will pop up here at some point in the beginning and also towards the end of the video. I have accumulated between 2 different pages like 3.5 or so million followers. So I tell at least one true crime story over on TikTok every single day, usually about 2. I also sell merch, which you can also find in the link tree below. We have t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that, and we ship all over the entirety of this entire, all of it. Every square centimeter of it. Planet, yeah. So check that out if you like. Lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, just email me. My email is listed, you guessed it, below skis. Gross. Just email me the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to my list. I cannot promise you when I'll cover that case, however, because I pick my cases at random. Just to be fair, I close my eyes and I scroll the list and I pick one. Boom, that's how it's done. And you can also see my list if you want to see it. It's in the link tree as well. It's totally public. You can't add to it, but you can see all the names. It's alphabetical if you want to check the list first before you recommend a case. But anyway, let's get into today's case, folks. Janet Gail Levine was born on February 20th, 1963, and she was born in Nashville, Tennessee. Janet did have a sibling. Her parents were very respected and well-known lawyers in the area. I believe they specialized in insurance law. Janet's dad especially became a very kind of higher echelon person in Nashville and was one of the most respected lawyers in the entire state of Tennessee. And both he and his wife and eventually their children were very involved in the Jewish community as well. As Janet grew up, she had a love for art. She loved to paint, she loved drawing, and she became extremely talented at it. Her dream was to become an illustrator and an artist. I think she wanted to be an animator at some point. Her artwork was shown in some of the most prominent and prestigious, restaurants and community centers all across Nashville. She would attend the University School of Nashville. She was the vice president of her class there, and then eventually she was accepted to her father's alma mater. Janet was described as very passionate, especially when it came to her art. She was it kind of encapsulated her life a lot. She was well-loved, she was charming, she was sweet, she was funny. She had personality for days and can make friends with anybody. She was not someone to ever be standoffish with people or kind of push people to the side. She was always very welcoming and very opening. At one point when she was in college, she was introduced by a friend to a guy named Perry March. Perry and Janet, they hit it off. They became boyfriend and girlfriends, and then it just sort of led to this blossoming relationship that would eventually lead to marriage. There was a time where Janet and Perry were actually in the Chicago area, and Janet was attending art school there. But it got to a point where Janet was just she didn't like being away from Nashville. She didn't like being away from her parents and from her family. And she really wanted to come back to the Nashville area. And in Nashville was the Vanderbilt Law School that Perry could possibly attend, because Perry was studying law. He wanted to become a lawyer. And, Janet's parents are very well-to-do. They had a lot of money. And so she convinced them to pay for Perry's law school at Vanderbilt. They did it. And so Perry and Janet would move to Nashville. Perry was a very astute guy, very smart, super intelligent. He had a lot of wit. He was very competitive, he was driven, and he seemed to, anytime he had a goal, anytime he wanted something, he basically would get it. So Janet and Perry, by the way, they married in 1987. The interesting thing is that it was not Perry who proposed to Janet. Janet had been impatient. She was waiting for him to finally pop the question, but he just wouldn't do it. And so she one day basically got on her knee and she proposed to Perry. And then he accepted, and then of course they would get married. Perry would eventually graduate law school. He would then begin to work at a law firm that was called Bass, Berry & Sims in Nashville. And Janet had graduated school too, of course, and she had started to illustrate children's books. In 1990, Janet and Perry would give birth to their son, Samson. And then in 1994, they had a daughter who they named Zipporah. Perry's dad, Arthur March, who was a prominent pharmacist for some time, after all of the marriage happened and the kids came, Arthur's house in Michigan would eventually get foreclosed. And one of the cool things about Janet's parents, her dad specifically, he purchased Arthur's home and then would lease it back to Arthur, and he wasn't going to charge him rent. He was actually just letting Arthur live in that house for free. And he was also encouraging Arthur to come to Nashville to live near the rest of the family. Then that's kind of how Arthur sort of explained the situation, but it turns out that wasn't necessarily true. Lawrence Levine, Janet's dad, would end up, he canceled this lease he gave to Arthur because Arthur wasn't paying, which would then lead to Arthur having to file for bankruptcy. And I think eventually at that point, that's when he moved to Nashville. Now, Perry March, while working at his law firm, would eventually get in some hot water because he was writing, at the time, anonymous but very sexual in nature notes to one of the paralegals there, leaving it on her desk to read. And these are very explicit letters talking about the things that he would want to do to her sexually. Despite, and he even said in the letters at that point, like I said, it was anonymous, so no one knew it was Perry for sure, but he had said, "Oh, I'm a married man, but I would love to do these things to you." Eventually, the law firm would set up a hidden camera to catch who was leaving these notes, and that's how they found out it was Perry. And so the law firm was like, "All right, we're going to give you the option. We're going to let you either choose to resign or we're going to fire you." But they gave him a lot of time to decide. And the paralegal became furious. She was upset with how the law firm seemed to be kind of giving him leeway in this. Eventually, he would end up having to pay her out $25,000. And he did that because it was an agreement they came to eventually avoid a sexual harassment lawsuit. But then Perry would end up getting a job at Lawrence Levine's law firm, his father-in-law. Throughout all of this, obviously Janet was upset because of the whole, sexual harassment thing. And people were noticing that she was kind of slipping a little out of her normal personality. She was less, smiling, happy. She was becoming a little bit more depressed. But then they would end up buying a home in Forest Hills, Tennessee, this really beautiful, very large, spacious home. And while for a little bit there was kind of some more happiness being brought back into the marriage, this exciting new adventure with this new house, but it would soon kind of start to dip back down where both Perry and Janet were slipping into depression and there was just issues and cracks in the marriage. And so Perry would start seeing a therapist. Janet would see one. Sometimes they would see one together. But Perry, according to many people, would begin to distance himself, it looks like, from the marriage and from Janet. He was observed out and about at night in the company of several women. This would end up leading to arguments between he and Janet. They were fighting more often. And, the marriage really just seemed to kind of hit its breaking point. Perry became more publicly aggressive. He got into these loud, big arguments with neighbors. His neighbors would describe Perry as having this really just nasty attitude, a very poor temper, getting in arguments over the stupidest things with neighbors. Perry, meanwhile, was still trying to make installment payments to the paralegal from, prior where he was sexually harassing. And I guess there was a final payment of like, I don't know, $11,000 where he said to them, like, I can't afford it. I can't pay it, which I think caused just more turmoil in the March household. They had a cleaning crew who would come to the March house to clean up. They had like a maid and stuff. And one of the maids would say that they saw a book on divorce, kind of where Janet would normally be sitting and reading. And so it appeared that Janet was considering, filing officially for divorce. On August 14th, 1996, the children's nanny would come to the house, and the nanny would later recall that Janet, who was typically someone who was very welcoming, to the nanny when she came in, and the two of them typically would chat and they would laugh and they would just sort of talk about a lot of things. She said on that particular day, on August 14th, Janet had no desire to talk to her. Janet appeared to be completely withdrawn, and she just was quiet, and something was obviously like she was just in a whole different mindset at that point. Friends would later come forward to state that around that time, Janet appeared to be kind of afraid of Perry. Like she seemed to be trying to avoid him because she just felt something. She said she had a reason or something to just be concerned about his behavior or afraid of him. And that may have eventually happened. In the morning and leading into the afternoon of August 15th, 1996, a couple of construction workers came to the March home because they were doing some repair work in the kitchen. And according to the repairmen, Janet was in the kitchen kind of giving them, telling them the things that they wanted to have done, while Perry was outside playing with the kids. The repair guys, they did their work, they finished it, and then they left. And those two repairmen were allegedly the last people to actually see Janet, other than her husband and the kids. Later that night, according to Perry and Janet got into a very large argument. A lot of screaming, a lot of aggression. It was very anger-filled. This is around 8 o'clock at night, and he said, listen, I will go to a hotel again, because he had been staying at hotels, I guess, every night for the past couple of, maybe a week or so. And so, but what Janet said, well, you know what? Don't bother, because I'm going on vacation. And she said, I'm going somewhere, I'm packing, and I'm not telling you where I'm going. Perry said that Janet then packed, a couple of clothing items into a bag. She got into her Volvo, and then she drove off. And she had her passport with her, I guess. Perry said that she also had $1,500 in cash and a little bit of pot, some weed with her. She also, according to Perry, typed out a list of chores and things for Perry to do while she was gone. It was this very detailed list that she allegedly herself signed the bottom of that list. He says she officially left the house at 8:30 p.m. on that August 15th, 1996 day. And then at that point, no one saw Janet ever again. Perry called his family at about 9 p.m. to state that Janet had left him and the kids. He calls a couple of people that night, and then the last people he calls are Janet's parents, the Levines. And, Carolyn Levine, Janet's mom, was like, that's strange. That's unusual. Janet, you're saying she just left you and the kids for an indefinite amount of time? That's not like her. That's super weird. But she's like, but maybe she did. And so just, give us a call when she gets back in town, and, we'll talk this through. We'll see what we can do. The following morning, when I guess their house cleaners got to the house, they all noticed that Janet wasn't there. Her car wasn't there. And according to them, it appeared the house had already been cleaned, which was weird because they were the ones to clean the house. That was their job. Perry would approach the cleaners and specifically tell them, don't clean the children's playroom. Don't go in there. Then the nanny arrives at the house, and Perry tells the nanny that Janet had gone to California to visit her brother Mark, who was also a lawyer. The nanny was like, really? That's strange, because, anytime Janet would do anything like that, like ever, at all, like even a slight change of plans, Janet would always call the nanny to tell her, what's going on, but the nanny never got a phone call, not even a missed call or anything from her. Then I guess a friend of the family would come over because, her kid had a play date with Samson, the March's son. And when this person arrived, she said every time they had a play date that both Janet and Perry would come out, they would greet her, they would welcome her in the house. They would, talk with her while the kids played. But when this particular morning she came over for it, no one came out to greet her at all. Perry, Janet, obviously, because Janet was gone, but Perry didn't come out or anything. When this friend finally got in the house, she said she noticed Samson was like on this giant rug that was rolled up, and he was like playing on it. And one of the house cleaners had also will state later, that Perry told them to not clean that rug. Don't touch that rug, don't clean that rug. Later on, Perry would talk to Janet's parents, and at first Janet's parents they believed Perry's story, that Janet had just sort of kind of picked up and went to California to visit someone. Now, according to Mark, this brother in California, there was no plan to meet him at all. This was made up. Janet's mom was like she was just really concerned because this was just not like Janet. She wouldn't leave the kids like with this impromptu vacation to who really knows where, and especially without telling them, like the parents. Like this is strange. But they knew Perry, they trusted Perry, he had been in their lives for a long time, and so they were still kind of just, believing what he was saying. Now, this list that Janet had typed up allegedly and left for Perry stated that she would be back in 12 days. And so Perry managed to convince her parents, well, let's wait for that 12 days to be up before we really become concerned. And the parents kind of hesitantly agreed to that. Around this time, later down the road, they would learn that Perry had been making several phone calls to his father, Arthur, who was then living closer to them in the Nashville area. They wouldn't know exactly why, though, until, later. Now, Samson's birthday, his 6th birthday, was around this time. And Janet never called him on his birthday, because his birthday, I think, was like on August 20-something. And she was, again, still away, out of town, so to speak. And when his birthday came, she had actually planned a large birthday party for him. She planned it. It's very unusual that she didn't show up for it. She wasn't there. She did not call. She did not leave him any gifts. She did not send him any gifts. No contact whatsoever. And that's kind of when her parents were like, wait a minute. Janet she wouldn't ignore her child who she loved more than anything. She loved her 2 kids. She would never do that. Just ignore him on his 6th birthday that she planned so long, this party. Like, this is something's up. And that's when Perry began to kind of join them like, oh yeah, something is wrong here. For sure. And so on August 29th, 1996, Janet's parents would finally call the police to report their daughter as missing, because Janet had never come home. She hadn't called, she hadn't sent letters, she hadn't done a thing. She had just fallen off the face of the earth. So one of the first things police do is they check out this list that Perry said Janet had left. Well, a lot of Janet's friends and family had seen this list, and there's a lot of things about it that didn't check out according to how Janet normally spoke or how she typed. She didn't have, I guess, the most proper typing etiquette in terms of capitalizations and stuff like that. But Perry, on the other hand, was because he's a lawyer, he's very proper about how he types everything. And the list just appears to be typed more by Perry than it looked to be typed by Janet. But police wanted to look at the computer where this came from. And they found the computer in the home. They saw it. It was, it looked fine. But then they noticed when they kind of took the cover off of the computer, the hard drive had been completely removed from it. And when they asked Perry, they're like, well, why is the hard drive removed? He's like, Jesus, I don't know. That's weird. I had never noticed that before. Why is the hard drive removed? Which a mystery. Come on, Perry. By this time, Janet's brother Mark, he has gone to Nashville. And this is after Perry had said that she had gone to visit him in California. And so Perry was caught in this gigantic lie. And at that point, people like the police, whatever, and everything would say that when Mark arrived, Perry appeared to be physically unwell. Like he had just been caught in this giant lie, and he was like shaking, and he's like, oh, God. On September 7th, 1996, Janet's Volvo was found. It was found only 5 miles from the March's house. It was parked in an apartment building parking lot, and it had been backed into the space. Everybody immediately knew that Janet did not do that, because Janet never parked like that. She had a really hard time backing into spots. Hell, I do too. I can't do it. Inside the car were literally everything Perry said that Janet had packed, all just in the car, just there. The investigators had the car forensically looked at while it was still in its parking spot, and the forensic team noticed that there was like this very kind of like thick layer of dust, of pollen, of stuff that had fallen from like the trees and stuff above. And this car hadn't just been parked there like the day they found it. This car had been parked there for some time. They couldn't say it had been parked there since the day she disappeared, but it had been there for a while. They actually found cobwebs in the wheel well of the vehicle, indicating that the car had not been driving, the tires had not been rotating, again, for some time. On the floor mat of the car, they found Janet's sandals just sort of there, as if she was in her sandals and then poof, she disappeared and just left the sandals behind. Police also noticed that in the packed bag with clothing in it, like it had a dress and a couple shirts and stuff, but there was no bra and there were no bras and there was no underwear packed at all. She also had packed no toothpaste, no hairbrush, nothing like that. It was very minimal, as if someone had just throws crap in a bag and let's just pretend she is gone somewhere. So at this point, the Levines they're now completely suspicious of Perry, as are police and many people. The Levines hired a private investigator, and the private investigator, every time they spoke to Perry always talked about Janet in the past tense. He never referred to her as she is this, or he always said, well, she was, always in the past tense, which to those who don't know is usually one of those brain things that we don't realize we're doing. But Perry, that would indicate that Perry knew she was no longer alive, and therefore subconsciously wasn't able to differentiate that to cover up his lie. And so he referred to her in the past tense, meaning that it sounded like Perry knew she was already dead. When Perry found out that this private investigator was going to be doing this, he was livid, and he wanted to know, he demanded from the private investigator, I want to know everyone you've talked to, and I want to know everything you've asked them, and I want to know what their answers were. Well, why is that, bud? We're just trying to find your wife. Meanwhile, the police are also investigating this, and they discover that for whatever reason, roughly a week after Janet would have disappeared, Perry had gone to a tire store and asked them to replace all 4 of his car tires. And when police spoke to this tire place, the employees there said, we have no idea why he wanted us to do that, because all 4 of his tires were basically new and they were in great condition. We even told him, your tires don't need to be replaced, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're perfect. But he demanded 4 new tires. And his excuse was, I don't like that brand, so I want a different brand. Okay? At this point, Perry is aware that there's this private investigator, obviously, that police are also investigating him, that a lot of suspicion is falling on Perry. Of course, he's the husband, the soon-to-be potentially ex-husband. They're finding out about all these arguments, these fights. Perry had maybe been unfaithful. At least he had sexually harassed a female coworker, got in a lot of trouble for it. The marriage was rocky, and so obviously all eyes are pointing towards him. And what does he do? He takes the kids, he moves out of state to Chicago, Illinois. Like an innocent person does, flees the area. He even packed up all of her belongings and took them with him. And apparently, I guess one of Janet's friends lived in Chicago, and Perry was talking to her on the phone one time after he picked up and left to go to Chicago. And he asked her, do you think I killed Janet? But then he says to her, before you answer, what would you say if you found out that I killed Janet and I put her in the trunk of the car? I drove her away from the house while the kids were playing, or while the kids were sleeping inside. I left them alone. And then I returned back to the house like nothing ever happened, what would you say? What the fuck? What kind of question is that, bud? Who asks that question to somebody? Not an innocent person. So obviously this friend tells the police, and at this point now, police, Janet's parents, her family, all of her friends, everyone thinks Perry killed her and disposed of her somewhere. The problem is they haven't found Janet, and there is actually no evidence that Janet is dead. They have no blood at the house. They've searched that house as thoroughly as humanly possible. And they looked into this, why was there this big rug that he demanded people not clean or touch? Well, it turns out he had purchased that rug apparently to cover up some portion of the floor, which people in their life thought that was strange because Perry and Janet weren't ones to have decorative rugs. So they thought that was kind of strange that he suddenly had this. But that being said, they didn't find any forensic evidence at the house. There wasn't any blood or, ripped out hair in the house or any sign whatsoever of anything going bad there. The kids didn't see or hear anything. There were no other witnesses who can say they saw or heard anything happen between Perry and Janet that would have led to them thinking he definitely killed her. There was nothing. They searched high and low for Janet. I mean, they got helicopters in the air. They got people searching on foot. They have police. They have volunteers. They have family, all the friends, all out there combing the entire area, searching thoroughly for her. Not a single trace of her, other than them finding her car with her belongings in it. But even that didn't yield anything. The car didn't show signs of, there's no blood, nothing like that. The driver's seat was actually pushed up in the position that Janet would have been if she was driving. It was in her position. Usually sometimes the killers will forget and they'll put the seat all the way back because they're taller. But in this case, that didn't happen. They got cadaver dogs, searching the house, searching their property. It was a big property, searching everywhere, with cadaver dogs. Nothing. And it got to a point where Perry would refuse to cooperate with police. He wasn't going to be answering any questions. He wasn't doing shit. But at that point, it was more than obvious, even though there was no evidence, that Perry had killed her. They had fought that night. He killed her somehow, some way. Maybe he strangled her to death, and that's why there was no blood or anything at the crime scene or at the house. But they all knew she was dead, and they all knew he did it. But it's really difficult to prosecute without a body. It's really difficult to prosecute without a body and also without evidence of a murder. Janet's parents would end up taking Perry to court to get custody of the two kids. Both sides are lawyers, so they're both very familiar with the process. But I believe that Janet's parents ended up winning out and they were granted temporary custody of the two kids just because Perry was considered a suspect in this potential murder. So the court said, well, let's better be safe than sorry. They also filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Perry for the death of their daughter Janet, and they actually won. So a jury did determine that Perry had caused Janet's death, despite, again, there not being any evidence of it. And so everything was going kind of great in their favor. Perry then moves to Mexico. He starts working at a different firm, and he seems to be kind of having this new life. But then everything kind of flips back. Courts would eventually overturn the wrongful death lawsuit, and the kids were eventually returned to Perry. Perry seems to be getting away with it, really, if you think about it. He's living his life now. He's got his kids back. He's living in Mexico. Everything is hunky-dory for him. Meanwhile, Janet's still nowhere to be found and no true resolution to this. But the police in, Tennessee are like, no, we're not letting him get away with this. And so they began, I think around 2004, to begin the indictment process against him for murder. And eventually a grand jury came back with an indictment. They said, we're going to be an indictment of charges on second-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and stuff like that. And so in 2005, Perry was formally arrested and charged with the second-degree murder of his wife, Janet. He was arrested in Mexico, and he was brought back to the States. So Perry is now in a jail in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's bunkmates with a guy a guy named Russell Ferris, who was also in jail awaiting a trial for a murder charge and also attempted murder. Russell Ferris would then go to the police to state that Perry had asked him to kill his in-laws. He had asked him to murder Lawrence and Carolyn Levine. Perry promised him he would basically post Russell Ferris's bond and pay him if he did this. And so the police were like, did he really do this? Come on. But Russell's like, put a fucking wire on me. I'll get him to say it again. And so he goes back into, he goes back to see Perry in prison because he's still in prison. And he's wearing a wire and he gets Perry to talk about it.
Take your time in it. You don't make any mistakes. You work carefully. You figure your reconnaissance. You do what you need to do. The thing you just have to remember is you have to clear the house for kids, make sure there's no kid there, and then you have to wait for the afternoon they're there together.
Yeah.
Leave no trace of it.
Look here, Perry. If they're both in that house, if they answer that door, it's over.
And yeah, so he did, and it's confirmed. He literally has tried to have the Levines murdered. The guy told Perry, listen, I'm going to walk up to that house, I'm going to knock on their door, they answer it, boom, I'm killing them both. Obviously, he wasn't going to because he'd already gone to police, but he had to play the part. And another twist came in when Perry had told Russell to contact his dad, Arthur. And so I guess Arthur he was actually in Mexico at that point. And the police eventually go to Mexico and they arrest Arthur because they also had recorded phone calls between Ferris and Arthur with regards to this plot to kill the Levines. Arthur was caught red-handed on the phone calls. And so Perry is then arrested a second time. He's already arrested still for Janet's murder, but then he's rearrested and charged with the solicitation to commit murder on the Levines. And then Arthur, his dad, is also arrested with solicitation to commit murder. While in prison, Perry basically opens his yapper and he admits to some inmates that he had killed Janet, that they had gotten into a lot of arguments, that there was just discussion of divorce and how Perry was, unfaithful and he had sexually harassed women and basically Janet had enough of it and so he killed her after an argument. So police are now asking Arthur, what do you know about Janet? Because now he's arrested, right, for solicitation to commit murder. And he's this almost 80-year-old man who's withering away. And eventually he agrees to take a plea deal with the solicitation part. And he tells police, I moved her body for him. Perry had told Arthur that he had killed Janet. And then he buried her body. And then he had asked Arthur to move her body.
Did your son ask you to do something for him, to assist him in a matter?
He asked me to help dispose of Janet's body.
Arthur also confirms to police that Perry admitted to him that he destroyed the hard drive on the computer because of the typed up letter and everything. So basically Arthur says that, he redug a grave in a different location in Kentucky, I think is where he said he ended up moving her body. And he confirmed it. He's like, I saw her body, literally the night or something after, she was killed. I saw her body, Perry showed it to me, and then I dug her back up and I moved her to Kentucky, to a different spot. It's just plain as day. And so police go to that location where he says she was. They dug all over and they could not find her. She was not there. Even still, they had enough now at this point to go forward with this trial against Perry March. And it finally began. Prosecutors would kind of give some actual physical evidence because in the trunk of her car, because they had found it, there was, I guess, clumps of hair, and they found DNA, which they were able to do mitochondrial DNA testing and discovered that there was DNA in the trunk of the car that belonged to Janet, to indicate that she was in her own trunk. Was it absolutely compelling enough to say that definitely Perry killed her? Not 100% because, I mean, as you open your trunk, your hair tends to fall into it and, you know, it's your car. So it wasn't like signed, sealed, delivered. That proves he did it. But they also have the testimony of Arthur stating he saw the body. He said everything Perry did, how he destroyed the hard drive, like the whole plot, the whole plan. They also presented evidence of the actual, you know, jail, you know, recordings of Perry ordering his in-laws to be murdered, and it was all caught on audio, and it was more than enough. And so he was found guilty of the murder of Janet March. All of the charges against him, conspiring to murder the Levines, the actual second-degree murder of Janet, plus other things, he was given a grand total of 56 years in prison. And you might be wondering, why wasn't it like life without parole? Because they don't have her body. So there is that teeniest possibility she may still be alive, even though we all know she likely isn't. But there wasn't concrete proof to state she was 100% dead. And so that's why he was not given that full, you know, complete life sentence. But 56 years for him, he's going to be very, very old. If he ever is released. Arthur was also, well, first he actually took a plea deal to get 18 months in prison for his cooperation. The judge was like, no, 18 months, go fuck yourself, we're not doing that. He gave him 5 years instead for all of his involvement in all of this, and Arthur would end up dying in prison. Perry March would obviously appeal many, many times, and essentially, I mean, the long and the short of it is Perry March is still in prison, rotting away. They still have not found Janet. Her body has never been recovered. I mean, let's be real, she is likely dead, but I hope one day they somehow find her, you know, to give that proper closure, that proper burial she deserves. At least the monster who likely killed her, can't say 100%, but likely killed her, at least he is rotting away in a prison cell, hopefully until the day he dies. And Janet March, in some way, shape, or form, got the justice she rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. Hope you found it interesting. Stop doing that to your neck, Mike. You're old and it hurts. I know. Anyway, please subscribe if you're into true crime. Give this video a like so more people can see it. Follow me over on TikTok. All of that stuff is below. Recommend a case to me to my email. Merch store in the link tree in the video description of this video below. What is this? I don't know. Spinning around. Shut up. Okay. Like I finish every single video, I am going to shove an object in my mouth to see how much I can fit down my throat. As a gay man, that probably sounded very strange. Or very, very... A mouse. Ugh. Do I have herpes now because of that? Ugh. What?